This is going to be a video expressing my position with regard to the current war in Afghanistan and why I believe it is wrong. I want to be clear, this is not an analysis of the question of whether the war is legal. That's a technical question that's really beyond the scope of this discussion. I also want to be clear that this is not an indictment of war or the use of force to secure legitimate national interest. I believe that such force is justifiable and to some extent was justifiable in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks on this country. To try to put this in context, I want to create a very brief outline as to what I think constitutes the criteria for a just war, or at least a legitimate use of military force. Initially, there has to be a legitimate interest with regard to securing the safety, well-being of a country's population or of allies, or perhaps of even third parties that are in jeopardy. So I think that that's an important criteria. The second one has to do with the conduct of the war in pursuit of those types of interest. It needs to be done in a way that minimizes death and destruction, especially with regard to non-combatants. The third criterion has to do with the fact that the war needs to be undertaken with some significant probability of military success. There are probably some exceptions to that in wars of direct self-defense, where a country or population's existence is at stake. Then there might be a requirement to fight on regardless of the hope of victory. And that certainly isn't the case with regard to the war in Afghanistan. And then finally, the military success actually has to have some bearing on the security objectives that launched the conflict. I think that's really important. You can win or lose militarily, but not actually achieve the important political goals. So using this framework as a way of looking at the Afghan war, let's take it point by point. I do think that the United States had a legitimate security interest in taking military action in Afghanistan. The fact of the matter is that it was at the time the war began a haven for the development of terrorist plans and projects against the people of the United States. And force certainly was justified in trying to thwart that. Unfortunately, the interest of the United States expanded quickly to include the defeat of the Taliban. The Taliban, because they gave safe haven to al-Qaeda, were considered to be equally an enemy. And I think this was probably the first step in how the war became misguided, and that is that the defeat of the Taliban was a much broader and less hopeful objective, and it also transformed the war from one of a narrow mission to accomplish specific security objectives to an adventure in nation building, not an activity that we particularly have good track record with. As regard to the second point, the conduct of the war, I don't think it has been conducted in ways that minimizes the death and the destruction of the people of Afghanistan. Estimates now have indirect and direct deaths in Afghanistan ranging from 3,000 or 4,000 to close to 20,000. It's not clear at all that this meets any proportionality requirements. Furthermore, I really bridle at the fact that the notion of collateral damage is used to sweep so many of these deaths under the rug, as though any designated tactical military target is a license to kill a dozen or 40 people in the pursuit of that particular individual or group of individuals. It's shameful that collateral damage is used as a justification in this way. The third criteria has to do with the probability of military success, and this is really quite troubling to me. The idea that the U.S. or its allies had any concept of how to conduct this war successfully, not only at the outset, but a good 10 years into it, is an indication, to me, much more of hubris than anything that has to do with intelligent defense planning. Nobody knows how to fight this type of war. The force structures for the United States and for NATO were and are still ill-constructed in order to accomplish the type of military success in an operation like this. And it boggles my mind that these revised plans for counterinsurgency are still believed or accepted with any credibility among the people that circulate them. Or it's just inconceivable that anyone could say with any confidence that they know how to pursue this war. And that's really important, because wars undertaken even with noble objectives are only justified to the extent that they have a hope of succeeding. And this war has no hope of succeeding. And so the question is whether it is pursued with the additional loss of an enormous number of lives, or whether there's a realization that it's time to stop and to acknowledge the fact that we don't have control over the situation in any significant way. And the final criteria has to do with the fact that military success, if it's a possibility, has to have some bearing on the security objectives that launch the conflict. And I think that that's a point that's quite overlooked. Even if we were to transform Afghanistan into, if not a functioning liberal democracy, a stable Western-leaning state, we would still have to address issues of havens, of terrorist activity there, and they would have to be addressed probably by the use of American military force in a limited way. This actually has been a proposal. This was a proposal I think the Obama administration was considering before they recommitted to the existing Afghan policy, and that was that the kind of force structure and the kind of security arrangements that work best for something like this is to have small groups of unconventional forces that are ready to insert themselves in order to disrupt terrorist activity. But more significantly, and that is that the security issue here has to do with terrorism and not with wars against nation states. And unfortunately, the big mistake that America has made and that its NATO allies have bought into, at least the military branches of NATO, and that the big mistake is that there is not a state actor to be confronted here. There's not an army to be defeated. The fact of the matter is that we took an operation that really should have been cast as an international collaboration, more like a police action against a very widespread criminal organization, and we turned it into a conventional military conflict. It was a mistake of the highest order. It was doomed to failure from the start. Our military forces aren't adapted or equipped to deal with globalized criminal organizations. And the result is that even if there is some success in Afghanistan, the criminal operations continue in other countries, in Yemen or perhaps in countries in Africa, Somalia. So Uh, the final dismal failure of this war is that even if it succeeds in a military way, it doesn't actually accomplish the important objectives, and that is securing the American people and the people of friends and allies against terrorist operations. So in summary, I just want to say that that the war was undertaken justifiably, but the goals were generalized in a way to become a war against the Taliban, which were really not consistent with our security objectives. It has been pursued with a relative indifference to human life that really strain any notion of proportionality with regard to just war theory. It's doomed to failure because nobody knows how to conduct this kind of war, no matter what the think tank people say. And it's doomed to failure because even if it succeeds, it doesn't address the security problem, and that is that there's a global international terrorist organization that's operating pretty much as a criminal conspiracy. And then finally, I want to say that probably the most significant failure of the war in Afghanistan, as far as how it's been conducted, is it really diverts us and our allies from our genuine security interest. It's not helping us look toward the future and build the types of forces and collaborations and intelligence operations and collaborative police actions that really are important to making people of our country safe. I look forward to any responses to this. I've done it pretty much unscripted, and I apologize for errors that I may have made. Please point them out to me. And I just want to close by saying, remember, we are all in this together.